Hi everyone, it's Mr. Moreau, and I'd like to help you go through the introduction to ecology slides and just make a few clarifications. I know we looked at this yesterday, but there are a few important terms in here that are going to be very important for us later, so I want to make sure that we are very clear on the definitions for these terms. So ecology, to start things off, is the topic of the entire unit that we're going to be learning about for the next week or so. Now, the study of ecology, what we are actually looking at is the interactions between organisms. That means how one living thing interacts with another living thing. But we're also looking at how they interact with their environment. So not only one living thing interacting with another living thing, but also a living thing interacting with its environment. Because there are living parts of the environment and there are non-living parts of the environment. And there is an important relationship between those things. The levels of organization will help us determine how specific or how general a term is. So we are going to start with the most specific one, and that is the individual. That means one single living thing, one single organism. Not all rabbits everywhere, but this rabbit right here, that is our example of one individual. If we get a bit more general and include a few more living things, then our next word, which is more inclusive or more general, is population. A population is a group of individuals. See how it's many individuals put together? So that's a little bit more general. Community is the next word on this ladder of terms, which is, again, even more general. A community is a group of populations. See how each one of these words is a group of the previous word? So individual, population, community. A community is many populations put together. You can see in this picture, there's a population of rabbits with a population of deer and a population of squirrels. If you include all of those things together, that is one community. Let's keep going. Even more general is ecosystem. An ecosystem includes the entire community, which is all of those populations, plus the physical environment itself. Now we're talking about the non-living parts of the ecosystem also. So now we're talking about the ground, the water, the air, the sunlight. All of those things are included in the ecosystem. Even more general, the word is biome. Now a biome is a group of ecosystems. So if you put many different ecosystems together, and when they have a similar climate, that is called a biome. Biomes have similar climate, and climate is really a good science word for weather. So that area has the same temperature, same amount of sunlight, same amount of rainfall. Those are the kinds of details that you think about when you say the word climate. So again, a biome is a group of ecosystems. For example, Earth has the forest biome. So all the forests, if you think about all the forests on Earth together, that is the forest biome. If you think about all the deserts on Earth together, that is the desert biome. I bet you can think of a few other examples of different biomes on Earth. And finally, the most general term is biosphere. That means we are talking about all living things and all the area where life is found. So for us, a good example of that is just the entire Earth, right? We don't know any other place besides Earth that has living things. So biosphere is the most general term we have right now. So other key terms, producer and autotroph. These words basically mean the same thing. It refers to an organism that makes its own food, okay? A producer or an autotroph, that is an organism that makes its own food. If that living thing makes food by using sunlight, that process is called photosynthesis. If the living thing makes food by using chemicals, then the process is called chemosynthesis. So usually we think about living things that are producers doing photosynthesis to make their food, like plants, but there are some areas where no sunlight exists. Think about the bottom of the ocean. No light gets all the way through the water down to the bottom of the ocean. Because there's no light down there, those living things that our producers or autotrophs have no light to use. Therefore, they use chemicals instead to make their food. But a producer, autotroph, they are the ones that make their own food. We are not producers. We are not autotrophs. That's because we cannot make our own food. Humans must eat other things for food. Let's do some examples of producers and autotrophs. Here's a cool picture of the largest tree on Earth. I'm not sure if you zoomed in, but did you see the person at the bottom of this tree? So look at how big that tree is when you can actually see the person down there at the bottom of the trunk. So trees are good examples of producers or autotrophs. Another good example would be bacteria that you find at the bottom of the ocean. At the bottom of the ocean, there are these things called hydrothermal vents. That's like a crack in the ocean floor. So lots of hot air and gas is coming out of the ocean floor. And on the edges of these vents, where all this hot air and gas is coming out, chemicals are coming out. So bacteria live right at that place, and they can use these chemicals in order to make their own food. Now for a different type of living thing. What if the organism does not make its own food, but rather it needs to eat other things for food? That is what we call a consumer or a heterotroph. Okay? The word autotroph, auto means they make it themselves. Heterotroph, hetero means different. So these kinds of living things have to eat different organisms in order to survive. There are different kinds of consumers. An herbivore is the kind of consumer that only eats plants. A carnivore is the kind of consumer that only eats meat. And an omnivore is the kind of consumer that that eats both plants and meat. So it doesn't eat one or the other. It can eat both. Now, here's one that we probably have not heard before. Okay, there's another kind of consumer called a detritivore. A detritivore. They are called detritivore because they eat detritus. Detritus is a fancy science word for dead matter. So when something dies, a detritivore comes along and eats that dead organism. Think about these bugs that you see on the left. They are eating the organic material, the dead material, off of the bones of this dead animal. On the right, you see a deep sea crab. So these live at the bottom of the ocean, and if something dies and sinks to the bottom of the ocean, these crabs will eat the dead animal. So a detritivore is something that only eats dead animal remains. And that is a little bit different than a decomposer. This is a different kind of consumer. Decomposers, for this one, we're thinking about bacteria and fungi, and these things break down organic material. So after the detritivores have eaten everything except the bones, pretty much, of the animal, then the bacteria and fungi are going to finish the job, and they are going to break down everything that's left. Now, decomposers are one of the most important parts of ecology, because if there were no decomposers, every living thing that ever existed, the bones or the leftover body would still be on Earth. Decomposers break that down into small molecules. They break it down and return those molecules into the ground so they can continue to be used by, let's say, the next generation of plants. Okay, so decomposers help break down all of the leftover dead organic matter so it doesn't pile up over time, and they help plants reuse those materials. Now for community interactions, these are how living things have a relationship with each other. Competition is one big way that organisms can interact. Okay, they can compete over the same resource. So in this series of pictures here, we've got birds competing over food. We have trees competing with each other, trying to grow the tallest for sunlight. We have two male deer fighting over probably who gets to mate with a female. This is a close-up picture of baby birds, and they are competing with each other because whichever baby bird reaches the highest, the mother is most likely to feed that one. In this picture down here, we have a group of lions and a crocodile there. At the bottom, you see a crocodile fighting over, looks like might be some kind of a female water buffalo possibly, but they are both trying to get that animal. And finally over here, we see lions and hyenas fighting over some food. So competition is basically organisms fighting for the same resource. Okay, predation, like predator. The predator hunts the prey. The predator eats the prey. No surprise there. And there were some cool videos here. The first one is when this baby iguana ran away from the snake. That's one of my all-time favorite videos. Lots of drama in that one. You can see that the baby iguana has to run through lots and lots of snakes, so it needs to be very fast. And then this one was a top 5 video. So there was 5 different chase scenes about the predator hunting for the prey. So I thought those were pretty cool. Hopefully you watched those. Another cool predation picture. You know that fish at the bottom of the ocean in Finding Nemo when the light shows up? So right here, this fish has this really cool feature where it can make some light. And that draws in other little fish. So some other little fish might be over here kind of checking this out and really interested in what's going on here, but then this fish is going to eat it very easily. So this is called a deep sea angler fish, and that is the scary fish from Finding Nemo. So that's a cool predator that we don't get to see in our daily lives too often. Okay, besides competition, besides predation, there's another way that organisms can interact, and that is symbiosis. Symbiosis means anytime organisms live closely together, and there are 3 different kinds of symbiosis. All right, so the first kind is mutualism. This means it's good for both. Okay, mutualism is good for both. In this example, it's good for the bee because the bee gets food. It's good for the flower because the flower gets reproduction. When the bee brings pollen from one flower to another flower, that is how the flowers reproduce with each other. Another good example of mutualism is this alligator and bird. The alligator does not eat the bird. Instead, it opens its mouth and lets the bird eat out of the alligator's mouth, and that causes the alligator's mouth to be more clean. So it's good for the alligator because its mouth gets more clean. It's good for the bird because the bird gets food. Mutualism, good for both. And then I also had this video for you about the caterpillar and the ants. So they were going to, or in this video you saw that it was a benefit. It was beneficial for the caterpillar to be near the ants. And then the caterpillar was giving those little sugary drops of water on its skin, and the ants were there to basically protect the caterpillar from other dangerous ants. Okay, another kind of symbiosis is commensalism. Commensalism. This is when it's helpful for one of the organisms, and it doesn't matter for the other one. In this picture, these pilot fish down here, it is good for them to have this relationship with the shark, okay? Because the shark is a very, very good hunter. It can pretty much smell and find anything, and it's really good at finding that prey and eating that prey. Well, when the shark is eating its prey, small pieces of those fish that the shark is eating, small pieces of the fish are going to fly away and float away in the water. Well, these pilot fish down below the shark follow the shark around so that they can get those scraps, those pieces of fish when the shark is eating other fish. So it's good for the pilot fish, and it does not affect the shark. In this example, with trees and birds, that is commensalism because the tree is not affected and the bird gets helped. Okay, this is providing a good home for the birds. And the third kind of symbiosis is parasitism. That comes from the word parasite. Parasitism. That is when one species is helped and the other is hurt. So it's good for one and bad for the other. For example, a good example of a parasite is this giant tapeworm that could live inside the intestines of a human. So parasites are usually small, and they usually live inside of another thing. Okay, not all examples of parasites are small and live inside of other things. The video that I showed you here was one of those examples. The parasite that you see in this one was between ants and a fungus, and it's called the cordyceps fungus, and it grows inside the body of these ants. Not just ants, other bugs also, but that is an example of a parasite because the fungus is helped and the ants are hurt. Okay, so those are some of the most important terms that we're going to talk about throughout the rest of ecology. So I just wanted to give you a little bit more clarification and go through those and talk about the examples. So we are ready to go in the future. The lesson that we're going to be talking about after this has a lot to do with those community interactions. And that is going to allow us to establish this idea of the food chain. So before tomorrow, that is the term that I would like you to define. Look up example pictures, perhaps a Google image. But if you know what a food chain is before tomorrow, that's going to be make things a lot easier. But watching this video was your responsibility for today. Thank you for listening, and I'll check in with you guys next time.